Hello and welcome to another episode of Linux and Code. Today is part 4 of our series in creating a JSON API, picking up right where we left off last time with our route structure being complete. Now we're going to get into actually accessing and saving data. Okay, so now that we have all of our indexes created and we're referencing all of our files, let's get into Create. And in a lot of IDEs, you can hold Control and click on this link and it'll jump you over to the file. Just a quick handy little access method. So now that we're here in Create, we're not really going to have a get method here. So we're going to comment that out for now. And we are going to need access to our user file that we created earlier. So that's going to be a const uppercase user because we're using it as a parent object in a lot of ways. We're going to say require. Now this, we can't reference to our current directory. We need to go up a level because the models aren't in our routes folder, so we need to keep climbing up. Now we see our routes folder, or our models folder. Go into that, and then we want user. So this now gives us a reference to that mongoose schema and model user. So now that we have this, what are we going to do? Well, usually in a post route, that's what you would use to create a resource, which our user is. So we're going to call router.post. And you usually don't need an ID or anything special on a post request unless you're doing it on a sub resource, and we'll talk about that later. But for right now, we're just creating a user, which is a top level resource. So we're going to take in a request, a response, and a next object. We're going to open this up to a new function, and the first thing that we're going to want to figure out is what is needed here. So I'm going to drag over this user model to the side so I can look at it at the same time, and we can see there's not a whole lot that we have to have here. Basically just a username, and we could have preferences if we wanted it, but it's not really required. So for now, we're just going to say user. And this is going to be our new object, right? Well, we need something else here. So we're going to say const user equals new user, because we're creating a new user, and we're going to give it a username. But now how do we reference this? Well, since we included body parser, we actually have a new method accessible to us, which is req.body. And this object is everything that the user passes in. So req.body.username is what we're after. Now, you will want to check that this property exists, and we're going to get into validations later, but for right now we're going to say if we do not have a request body, return a response with a status 400, which is an invalid request, JSON, and we're going to say message missing required fields. So if somebody tries to post something to this route and it doesn't have a body, we're going to reject the request and not even let it get to the rest of our logic, which is pretty good. So now we're creating this user with this username, and that's essentially it. Now we just need to save it to our database. So we're going to call user.save. That's a method on the mongoose object, and now we're going to use a promise. We're going to call .then, and we're getting our saved user back, and we're going to give that back to the request. So we're going to return a response. Status 201 is the status code for successfully created, so we're going to use that, JSON, and we're going to give it our saved user object because this is already a JSON object from mongoose. So if we save this, it would work. However, we also want to put a .catch on here because this could have an error. And we're going to say return response.status 500 for an internal server error, and we're going to say JSON message error saving user. And for our convenience, we're going to console.log that error But we don't want to necessarily give that error back to the user because it could reveal internal information about our database. So we're going to save that. And now if we come over here to our request, we don't want to do a GET request, right? So we want to do a post. But this is still to this URL, so I'm going to copy this. And our content type is application/JSON. And now we have to have our body. So we're going to have a username. That's all we're sending, right? And that's going to be, oh, I don't know. We'll call our first user Bob. And now if we send this request, looks like my extension is throwing an error. Oh, there needs to be space between the body and the header. Okay. I don't want to save that. Let's send it. We get a response back. And we have all of our headers. We see we get a status code 201, so it's successfully created. And down here, we get the results. So we get our ID, we get our username, and a document version, which we may not want to return always, but in this case, it's just fine. And our username, Bob, was created. So that's awesome. Our user document is working. Now let's do the same for item. And we're actually going to copy a little bit of this code so we don't have to repeat ourselves as much. We just need to change a couple things. For one thing, we need to include item instead of user. And then we need to create an item instead of a user. However, the item property or the item object is a little bit different than the user object, so I'm actually going to just pass in body directly because this is a little bit more dynamic. And now if we created an item, let's look at what that should have again. We see we would have an item type, content, and a creator. So I'm going to pass this in as the ID that we got back. So we're going to make a new request. I'll copy this string again. Although we are calling item this time. And now we're going to have, let's take a look one more time, an item type. So this can be whatever you want, right? And in this case, I'm just going to call it a string. Although this could be whatever we want. So let's just make it a note, actually. And then the content, which was mixed, remember, so this can be whatever we want, but I'm just going to say a simple note. And then we can pass in that creator, which was this ID that I need to copy again. Okay, and let's send that request. And our response came back. You can see in our console that request went through, and we get our item back. Saved to the database, which is great. And we know it's saved to the database because we didn't pass in this ID. We set that as a default on our model that this would get created. And so it's great that we're getting this back because that means, for one thing, our creator ID was saved, but so was a new ID generated for us on item. And that's really good to see. And we should be able to make another one. We'll just copy this whole thing. But we'll change this to a type. Well, we'll leave it the same type and we'll say more complex note and send that same request. Now, why do we get an error? And it's actually complaining about a duplicate key. And the reason for this is our default that we set over on this item. This is getting called once when the model is established and then never touched again. You can do a math.random in here, and that'll actually solve this problem. So the reason for this is not easy to work around, so instead of continuing to hack in our model, we're actually going to solve it a little bit of a different way. And this is something we'll look at fixing in a more permanent matter later, but for right now we're going to copy this UUID initialization and head over to our create in item. And we're going to paste in our UUID requirement, and instead of directly passing in this RQ.body, we're still going to do that. We're going to use something called the spread operator to get all of those properties passed in, and then we're going to say underscore ID is equal to UUID. And that'll do it at this level, and we won't ever have to worry about this model again. Now we should do the same thing over for the create on our user, because it's going to be another problem there as well. So now we should be okay. So let's try it out. Go over here and we'll say more text for IDs. We'll send our request. Works the first time. Hopefully last text for IDs, and we'll send it. And we get 2 subsequent writes in a row that work correctly, so we know we're okay. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this episode. In the next episode, we're going to get into update, read, and delete. Hope you have a great day. Take care.